The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, precisely 13 minutes before Margaret Chen was supposed to leave for her daughter's high school musical. The subject line read, "Invitation to meeting, tomorrow 9 a.m. The sender was HR, copying her direct manager and two people she'd never heard of from organizational development. Margaret stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. In 17 years at Hawthorne and Associates, she'd learned to read the tea leaves. Meetings with HR plus strangers plus your manager equaled nothing good. Her heart performed a sickening somersault. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me continue this interesting story. Margaret was 43 years old. She had a mortgage, a daughter in sophomore year, a son starting college in the fall, and a car that needed new tires. She had exactly $8,000 in savings and a 401k she'd been meaning to contribute more to for the past decade. She closed her laptop with deliberate calm, gathered her coat and bag, and walked to her car. Only when she was safely inside, doors locked, did she allow herself to grip the steering wheel hard enough that her knuckles went white. "Not now," she whispered to the universe. "Please, not now." But the universe, as it often does, had other plans. The meeting the next morning lasted exactly 12 minutes. Diane from HR had kind eyes and a folder of paperwork that she slid across the table with practiced sympathy. "Restructuring," she said. "Your entire division is being consolidated with the West Coast team. We're offering a severance package of 6 months' salary, continued health insurance for 90 days, and outplacement services." Margaret's manager, Richard, couldn't meet her eyes. He'd been her mentor once, back when she was 26 and hungry and brilliant. Now he was 58 and protecting his own position, and she couldn't even blame him. "This isn't about your performance," Diane continued, which was corporate speak for, "this is absolutely about your performance, or at least about the fact that we can hire 2 25-year-olds for your salary." Margaret signed the papers. She shook hands. She smiled and said she understood, because what else could she do? Cry, rage, beg. She had too much pride for that, and too much experience. She'd seen this happen to others. She just never thought it would happen to her. By 10 a.m., she was in her car again, a cardboard box of desk belongings on the passenger seat. A coffee mug her daughter had made in 3rd grade. A framed photo of her kids at the beach, back when they were small and life was simpler. A succulent plant that had somehow survived 17 years of fluorescent lighting. She drove home in a daze, parked in the driveway of the house she and David had bought 20 years ago, back when they were married and hopeful and stupid enough to believe that love and effort were enough. The divorce had been finalized 2 years ago. He'd remarried within 6 months. A woman named Brittany who was 34 and taught yoga and posted inspirational quotes on Instagram. Margaret sat in her car and did the math. 6 months severance was $54,000 before taxes. Maybe $38,000 after. Added to her savings, that gave her $46,000 to figure out the rest of her life. Her mortgage was $2,200 a month. Her son's college tuition was $35,000 a year, even with financial aid. Her daughter needed braces. The numbers didn't work. They just didn't work. She pulled out her phone and opened LinkedIn, that digital meat market where everyone pretended their lives were perfect and their careers were trajectories of uninterrupted success. Her profile stared back at her, Senior Project Manager at Hawthorne and Associates. 17 years in project management. A degree from a good state school. Certifications in Agile and Six Sigma that had cost thousands of dollars and countless hours. On paper, she was qualified, experienced, valuable. In reality, she was 43 years old in an industry that worshipped youth, female in a field that still gave promotions to men, and suddenly, terrifyingly unemployed. She sat in her car until her phone rang. It was Emma, her daughter. "Mom, why are you home? Are you sick?" Margaret looked up at the house. Emma was watching from the living room window, her face pressed against the glass, confusion written in the furrow of her brow. "No, honey," Margaret said, her voice steady despite everything. "I'm fine. I'll be right in." She gathered her box and walked into the house, into her second act, though she didn't know it yet. The first month was a blur of applications and rejections. Margaret applied to 127 positions. She got 3 interviews. The first was with a startup run by a 29-year-old CEO who wore expensive sneakers and called everyone bro. He asked Margaret where she saw herself in 5 years. She said, "Hopefully contributing to a company's growth while continuing to develop my skills." He said, "Right, cool. We're really looking for someone who's more of a cultural fit, you know? Someone who can really vibe with the team energy." Margaret knew what that meant. It meant she was old. The second interview was with a corporation that put her through 5 rounds of interviews, including a presentation to a panel, a case study that took her 2 full days to complete, and a personality assessment that asked questions like, "Do you prefer working alone or with others?" and "Rate your stress level on a scale of 1 to 10. After 6 weeks, they sent her a form rejection email. The third interview seemed promising. The hiring manager was a woman in her 50s who actually read Margaret's resume and asked intelligent questions. They talked about strategy, about managing complex stakeholder relationships, about the challenges of implementing change in resistant organizations. Margaret left feeling hopeful. She didn't get the job. They hired an internal candidate instead. By month 2, Margaret's severance was paying the bills, but her savings were dwindling. She'd had to have a conversation with her son, James, about college costs. He'd been accepted to his dream school, a private university with a prestigious engineering program. The financial aid package wasn't enough, even with the loans. "We'll make it work," she'd promised him, watching his face crumple with disappointment and guilt. "We always do." But she didn't know how. She didn't know anything anymore. She started looking at retail jobs, office administration roles, anything that would pay. But those jobs looked at her resume and said she was overqualified, which was another way of saying they thought she'd leave the moment something better came along. They weren't wrong. By month 3, Margaret was sending out applications at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, her laptop burning hot on her legs as she tweaked her resume for the 100th time. She'd removed her graduation year. She'd shortened her experience section to only the last 10 years, hoping to hide her age. She tried rewriting her summary in the breathless, buzzword-laden language of LinkedIn influencers, dynamic and results-driven professional with a passion for innovation and a track record of delivering value in fast-paced environments. She barely recognized herself in those words. Emma found her one night, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, empty coffee cups surrounding her like a ceramic fortress. "Mom, it's 3 in the morning." Margaret looked up, blinking. "I know, honey. I'm just finishing something." Emma sat down across from her, her teenage face unusually serious. "You're scaring me. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you lost your job. You're stressed all the time. You barely eat. You're up all night doing this." Emma gestured at the laptop. "When was the last time you even left the house except to go to an interview?" Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She couldn't remember. "I can get a job," Emma said. "Lots of kids at schoolwork. I can help. Something cracked in Margaret's chest. Her daughter, her 15-year-old daughter, was offering to get a job because Margaret couldn't keep it together. No, Margaret said firmly. Absolutely not. Your job is school. My job is figuring this out. But you haven't figured it out, Emma said softly. Maybe you need to try something different. After Emma went back to bed, Margaret sat in the dark kitchen and let herself cry for the first time since she'd been laid off. Big, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for the job she'd lost, for the career she'd built that had evaporated, for the failure she felt as a mother and a provider and a person. When she was done, she felt hollow, empty, but also strangely clear. Emma was right. What she was doing wasn't working. She needed to try something different. She just had no idea what that was. The answer came from an unexpected place. Her kitchen. Margaret had always been a good cook. More than good, actually. When she and David were married, she'd hosted dinner parties that their friends still talked about. Elaborate meals that seemed effortless, flavors that surprised and delighted. Cooking was her meditation, her creativity, her joy. During the divorce, when everything else was falling apart, she taught herself to make sourdough bread from scratch. There was something deeply satisfying about the process. The feeding of the starter, the patient fermentation, the alchemy of flour and water and time becoming something nourishing and beautiful. Now, unemployed and anxious, she found herself baking more. Bread, yes, but also pastries, cakes, cookies. She'd bring them to Emma's school events, to her book club, to neighbors. People always reacted the same way. Eyes widening, sounds of appreciation, requests for recipes. You should sell these, her neighbor Sandra said one day, biting into a chocolate croissant. Seriously, Margaret. This is better than anything I've had at a bakery. Margaret laughed it off. But the comment lodged in her brain. That night, instead of scrolling through job listings, she opened a different tab. She searched for starting a home bakery business. Then, cottage food laws. Then, how to sell baked goods legally. She fell down a research rabbit hole that lasted until 4 a.m. She learned that her state had cottage food laws that allowed home bakers to sell certain products without a commercial kitchen license, as long as they followed specific regulations. She learned about business licenses, liability insurance, food handlers permits. She learned about pricing, about marketing, about finding customers. It seemed impossible. Also, it seemed possible. She was 43 years old. She had a degree in business and 17 years of project management experience. She knew how to plan, how to execute, how to manage budgets and timelines and stakeholder expectations. She knew how to solve problems. Why couldn't she solve this one? The next morning, she told Emma about the idea over breakfast. You want to start a bakery? Emma said, spreading jam on toast. Not a bakery exactly. More like a home baking business. I could take special orders. Do custom cakes for events. Maybe sell at the farmer's market on weekends. Emma studied her mother's face. You look different. Different how? Less scared. More like you. Margaret felt a flutter in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or terror. Possibly both. It's probably a stupid idea, she said. I don't know anything about running a business. You know about running projects at work. Isn't it kind of the same thing? Margaret blinked. Out of the mouths of teenagers. Yeah, she said slowly. Yeah, I guess it kind of is. Turning an idea into a reality turned out to be significantly harder than Margaret anticipated. First, There was the legal maze. She spent a week navigating city and county websites, filling out forms, paying fees. She got her business license, her food handler's permit, her cottage food operation approval. She found an insurance agent who specialized in home-based businesses and bought liability coverage that made her savings account weep. Then there was the practical problem of her kitchen. Her home oven could only bake one cake at a time. Her refrigerator was already crowded with regular family groceries. She needed more space, more equipment, more everything. She took a hard look at her finances. She had $31,000 left from her severance and savings. Her mortgage was due in 2 weeks. Her son needed books for the fall semester. Her car insurance was coming up. She could spend $5,000 on equipment for a business that might fail, or she could hold on to it as a safety net. The old Margaret, the careful, responsible Margaret who'd spent 17 years in a corporate job precisely because it was safe, would have chosen the safety net. The new Margaret, the one who'd been rejected 124 times and cried in her kitchen at 3 a.m., decided that safety was an illusion anyway. She bought a commercial-grade stand mixer, a second oven, a countertop convection model that she installed in the garage, more baking sheets, cooling racks, cake pans in every size, a scale that measured in grams, piping bags and tips and food coloring and fondant and more vanilla extract than any reasonable person should own. Emma helped her reorganize the kitchen and garage. James, home for summer break before college, built her shelves and a workspace. They transformed the garage into something that looked almost professional. "Mom," James said, stepping back to survey their work, "I think you might actually be serious about this." "I think I might be," Margaret agreed. Now she just needed customers. She started with Facebook, because that's where people her age lived online. She created a page called Margaret's Custom Cakes and Baked Goods, and spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing a profile photo and banner image. She wrote a description that sounded more confident than she felt. Custom cakes, pastries, and baked goods made from scratch with premium ingredients. Available for special occasions, events, and farmers' market sales. She invited her friends to like the page. 17 people did, most of them out of pity. Then she took photos of everything she baked. She learned about natural lighting and angles and food styling from YouTube videos. She posted 3 times a week, a sourdough loaf here, a birthday cake there, a batch of macarons in rainbow colors. Slowly, people started engaging, liking, commenting, sharing. Her first order came from Sandra, her neighbor. A birthday cake for her husband's 50th. Chocolate cake with mocha buttercream, decorated with edible gold leaf. Margaret charged $75, which felt simultaneously too much and too little. She spent 2 days on that cake. She baked test layers to get the recipe perfect. She made 3 different batches of buttercream before the texture was right. She watched tutorials on smooth finishes and sharp edges. She applied the gold leaf with tweezers, 1 delicate piece at a time. When she delivered it, Sandra's eyes went wide. "Margaret, this is incredible. It's too beautiful to cut. Please cut it," Margaret said. "I want to know if it tastes as good as it looks." The next day, Sandra called her. "Everyone at the party wants to know who made the cake. I gave them your Facebook page. Is that okay?" "Yes," Margaret said, her heart hammering. "Yes, that's perfect." Within a week, she had 3 more orders. The thing nobody tells you about starting a business is how relentless it is. Margaret had thought corporate project management was demanding, but at least corporate projects had teams. They had budgets. They had infrastructure and support, and someone else to call when things went wrong. Running a home bakery, she discovered, meant being everything. Baker, marketer, accountant, customer service representative, delivery driver, janitor. She was working 16-hour days, starting at 4 a.m. to bake for the farmers market, spending afternoons meeting with clients or shopping for supplies, working evenings on custom orders, staying up late to manage her social media and respond to messages. Her house smelled perpetually of vanilla and butter. Her hands were covered in small burns from oven racks. Her back ached from standing. Her brain never stopped churning through recipes, schedules, pricing calculations. She was exhausted. She was also happier than she'd been in years. The farmers market became her regular Saturday morning gig. She'd wake at 3 a.m., load her car with fresh sourdough loaves, croissants, scones, and whatever special items she'd prepared that week. She'd set up her booth, arrange her baked goods on tiered displays, put out samples, and spend 4 hours talking to customers. She loved it. The direct feedback. The immediate gratification of watching someone bite into her croissant and close their eyes in pleasure. The regulars who started showing up specifically for her bread. The conversations about fermentation and flour types and why good butter matters. One Saturday, a woman in her 60s stopped at her booth and picked up a loaf of bread, examining it with the critical eye of someone who knew what she was looking at. "This is real sourdough," the woman said. "Not that fake stuff with commercial yeast." "It is," Margaret confirmed. 72-hour fermentation. "I owned a bakery for 30 years, the woman said. "In Portland. Retired 5 years ago. I know good bread when I see it." She bought 3 loaves. "What's your story?" "My story. Everyone starting a bakery at the farmers market has a story. Career change. Lifelong dream. Inherited family recipes." Margaret smiled. "Career change. I was a project manager. Got laid off at 43. Decided to stop applying for jobs that didn't want me and start building something that did." The woman nodded approvingly. "Best decision I ever made was starting my bakery. I was 38. Everyone said I was crazy, too old, it would never work. 30 years later, I sold it for enough to retire comfortably." She handed Margaret her card. "I'm Ruth. If you ever want advice from someone who's been there, call me." Margaret looked at the card. Ruth Morrison, bakery consultant. "I might take you up on that," she said. "Please do. Women our age need to stick together. The world keeps telling us we're done, that our best years are behind us. Screw that." Ruth winked. "Our best years are the ones where we finally figure out what we actually want." Margaret watched Ruth walk away and felt something shift in her chest. For months, she'd been thinking of this as Plan B, as what she was doing because she'd failed at Plan A. Ruth had just reframed it as something else entirely. Not a backup plan, but a better plan. By month 6, Margaret was making about $3,000 a month from her baking business. It wasn't enough to match her old salary, but it was covering most of her bills, and it was growing. She'd built a reputation. People knew her bread. They requested her cakes for their important events. She'd been featured in a local food blog, which had brought a surge of new customers. She'd started getting inquiries about wedding cakes, which terrified and excited her in equal measure. She called Ruth, the woman from the farmers market. They met at a coffee shop, and Ruth asked pointed questions about Margaret's business model, her pricing, her capacity, her goals. Margaret had done plenty of project planning in her corporate life, but she'd never applied that thinking to her own business. Ruth made her do it now. "You're undercharging," Ruth said bluntly. "That elaborate 3-tier cake you posted? You charged $200. You should have charged at least $350, probably $400. People won't pay that, Margaret protested. The right people will. The people who want quality, who understand value, who want something special, they'll pay. The people who want cheap grocery store cake, those aren't your customers anyway. Ruth pulled out a notebook. Let's talk about your cost structure. They spent 2 hours going through Margaret's numbers. Ruth showed her how to calculate her true costs, not just ingredients, but her time, overhead, equipment depreciation, packaging, delivery. When they were done, Margaret realized she'd been significantly underpricing everything. You're thinking like an employee, Ruth said. You're used to trading time for a salary. But as a business owner, you need to think about profit margin, growth, sustainability. You need to charge what your work is worth, not what you think people might pay. What if I lose customers? You'll lose the wrong customers. And you'll gain the right ones. Trust me. Margaret went home and revised her entire pricing structure. She raised her prices by 30 to 40% across the board. She braced for the backlash. It never came. Instead, her bookings increased. Higher prices had signaled higher quality. People took her more seriously. She attracted clients who valued craftsmanship, who were willing to pay for excellence. By month 9, she was making $5,000 a month. She hired Emma as her part-time assistant, teaching her daughter how to pipe borders and arrange flowers. She hired James to build her a website when he came home for winter break. She started turning down orders because she was fully booked. She had to make a decision: stay small and manageable, or grow. The old Margaret would have stayed small, safe, predictable. The new Margaret decided to grow. Growing meant taking risks. Real risks, with real consequences. Margaret couldn't expand further in her home kitchen. She was already pushing the legal limits of her cottage food license. If she wanted to take on more orders, especially wedding cakes and large events, she needed a commercial kitchen. She found one through a shared commercial kitchen space downtown. For $800 a month, she could rent time in a professional kitchen with industrial ovens, walk-in refrigerators, and all the space she needed. It was terrifying to commit to that expense, but Ruth coached her through the math. You're already turning down $3,000 to $4,000 in orders every month because you don't have capacity, Ruth pointed out. The kitchen rental will pay for itself if you take on just 2 more wedding cakes a month. Margaret signed the lease. She also did something else she'd been avoiding. She reached out to her old network from Hawthorne and Associates. Pride had kept her from doing this earlier. She didn't want her former colleagues to know she was running a home bakery instead of working for another corporation. She didn't want to seem like she'd failed. But she'd learned something in the past year. There was no failure in building something with your own hands, in serving people, in creating value. The only failure was in caring more about what other people thought than about her own growth. She sent a carefully crafted email to her old contacts, with photos of her work and a link to her new website. She offered corporate catering services, breakfast pastries for meetings, desserts for events, custom cakes for office celebrations. The response surprised her. Her former colleagues weren't pitying or condescending. They were impressed. Jealous, even. Several admitted they hated their jobs and wished they had the courage to do something different. Within 2 weeks, she had booked 3 corporate clients for recurring monthly orders. By month 12, 1 year since she'd been laid off, Margaret was making $8,000 a month. She'd not only replaced her old income, she'd exceeded it. More importantly, she owned it. Every dollar was hers, earned through her skill and effort and courage. No corporate restructuring could take it away. No HR department could decide she was redundant. No 29-year-old in expensive sneakers could tell her she wasn't a cultural fit. She was building something that was entirely hers. Success brought its own challenges. James came home for summer break after his freshman year and found his mother working 15-hour days, stressed and exhausted despite the growing business. "Mom, you're doing the same thing you did at your old job," he said, "just with different hours and no vacation days." He wasn't wrong. Margaret had traded one kind of burnout for another. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted. "Every order is income. Every client could refer new clients. If I turned down work, I could miss opportunities." "Or," Emma chimed in, "you could train someone to help you. You know, delegate. Like you used to do when you managed teams." Margaret stared at her children. When had they become so wise? She called Ruth. "You're at an inflection point," Ruth said. "Every business owner reaches it. You can either stay small and do everything yourself, or you can build something bigger by bringing in help. Neither choice is wrong, but you have to choose deliberately." Margaret thought about what she wanted. Not what she should want, not what would impress anyone, but what would actually make her happy. She wanted to bake. She wanted to create beautiful things. She wanted satisfied customers and the pride of excellent work. She didn't want to spend 6 hours a week on bookkeeping. She didn't want to do all the shopping and deliveries and social media management. She didn't want to be so tired that she couldn't enjoy what she'd built. She made her first hire, a part-time baker named Maria, a recent culinary school graduate who was talented and eager to learn. Margaret trained her carefully, teaching her techniques and recipes. Maria took over the farmer's market production and the simple custom orders, freeing Margaret to focus on complex cakes and new product development. She hired a bookkeeper for 10 hours a month. She hired a college student to manage her social media and respond to initial customer inquiries. She paid Emma and James properly for their work instead of relying on family labor. Her expenses went up. But so did her capacity, her income, and her sanity. She also did something revolutionary. She started taking Sundays off. Complete days off. No baking. No emails. No work at all. The first Sunday, she felt guilty. The second, anxious. By the fourth, she realized the business didn't collapse without her constant attention. Maria was competent. Systems were working. The world kept turning. She spent her Sundays reading, walking, cooking for pleasure instead of profit, having actual conversations with her kids. She remembered what it felt like to be a person instead of a productivity machine. Emma noticed the change. "You smile more now," she said one evening. Margaret realized it was true. Despite the challenges, despite the long hours, despite the risks and uncertainties, she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she hadn't been in her corporate job, even in the good years. She was 44 years old, and she was just beginning to understand who she actually was. The message came through her website's contact form on a Tuesday morning. "Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm 47 years old, and I was just laid off from my job of 19 years. I found your bakery through a blog post about career reinvention. Your story really resonated with me. I don't want to start a bakery, but I do want to start something of my own. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I could use some advice from someone who's been through this." Margaret stared at the message. A year ago, she'd been Patricia. Scared, lost, convinced her life was over at 43. They met at a coffee shop. Patricia was dressed in business casual, her resume in a folder that she clutched like a life preserver. She looked tired, defeated. Margaret knew that look intimately. "Tell me your story," Margaret said. Patricia did. It was painfully familiar: a corporate career in finance, a layoff disguised as restructuring, interviews that went nowhere, the creeping panic as savings dwindled and bills piled up. She was married with 2 kids in college. She couldn't afford to be unemployed, but no one wanted to hire a 47-year-old woman when they could get someone younger and cheaper. "I don't know what to do," Patricia said, her voice breaking. "I've applied to 200 jobs. I've had 6 interviews. Nothing. I feel invisible." "You're not invisible," Margaret said. "You're just looking in the wrong places." "What do you mean?" "You're trying to get someone else to give you a job, to see your value, to choose you. But what if you chose yourself instead?" Patricia looked skeptical. "I don't have a marketable skill like baking. I'm good at financial analysis and budgeting and strategic planning, but how does that translate to a business?" "Every business needs financial analysis and budgeting and strategic planning," Margaret pointed out. "Small businesses, especially. Do you know how many entrepreneurs have great ideas but terrible financial management? Do you know how many businesses fail because the owner doesn't understand their numbers?" She could see the wheels turning in Patricia's mind. "I could do consulting," Patricia said slowly. "Help small businesses with their finances." "You could. Or bookkeeping services. Or CFO services for startups that can't afford a full-time CFO. Or financial coaching for individuals. Or all of the above." Margaret leaned forward. "Patricia, you have 19 years of finance experience. That's not worthless because a corporation decided to restructure. That's incredibly valuable to the right people. You just have to find them." They talked for 2 hours. Margaret shared everything she'd learned: the legal steps, the marketing strategies, the pricing mistakes, the importance of finding a mentor. She introduced Patricia to Ruth, who agreed to meet with her. "Why are you helping me?" Patricia asked as they were leaving. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Margaret thought about Ruth, who'd helped her at the farmer's market. About all the women over 40 who were told they were done, washed up, too old to matter. "Because someone helped me," Margaret said. "And because women our age need to stop competing for scraps and start building tables big enough for all of us." Over the next months, Margaret found herself becoming an accidental mentor to other women reinventing themselves after 40. Patricia introduced her to friends who were also displaced or unhappy or looking for change. Word spread. Women reached out through her website, through social media, through mutual connections. Margaret started hosting monthly meetups, informal gatherings at coffee shops where women could share their stories, ask questions, support each other. She called them second chapter sessions. The women came from everywhere: a 52-year-old former teacher starting a tutoring business, a 45-year-old HR professional launching a career coaching practice, a 48-year-old nurse creating a health advocacy service. They were talented, experienced, valuable, and they'd all been told they were too old, too expensive, too something. Together, they rewrote the narrative. Margaret shared her story at a local business association meeting. Then at a women's leadership conference. Then on a podcast about entrepreneurship. She was never trying to build a speaking career, but people wanted to hear from her. Middle-aged women especially. They needed to hear that life wasn't over at 40, that starting over wasn't failure, that their best work might still be ahead of them. One woman approached her after a talk, tears streaming down her face. "I'm 41, and I just got laid off. I've been terrified. But hearing your story, I think I might be okay. I think this might even be a gift." "It is a gift," Margaret said. It just doesn't feel like one until later. The feature in the regional business magazine came as a surprise. A reporter had attended one of Margaret's second chapter sessions and was intrigued by the community she'd built. The resulting article wasn't just about Margaret's bakery. It was about the ecosystem of women entrepreneurs she'd helped foster, about second acts and resilience and the economic power of women over 40. The headline read, "Rising After 40. How Margaret Chen Built a Business and a Movement." A movement. Margaret hadn't meant to build a movement. She'd just meant to survive. But survival, she was learning, sometimes looked like revolution. The article brought more attention than she'd expected. Local news stations wanted to interview her. A national women's magazine reached out. Business schools invited her to speak to their students about entrepreneurship and resilience. She was still, first and foremost, a baker. That hadn't changed. But she was also becoming something else. A voice for women who refused to be invisible, who refused to accept that their value expired with their youth. Her bakery was thriving. She'd moved into a larger commercial kitchen space and hired 3 full-time employees. She'd expanded into wholesale, supplying several local cafes with her sourdough bread. She'd started teaching baking classes on weekends, not just for income, but because she loved sharing what she'd learned. She was making more money than she'd ever made in her corporate job. More importantly, she was making a difference. Emma, now a senior in high school, had decided to study business and entrepreneurship. "Because of you," she told her mother. "You showed me that you can build something from nothing, that it's never too late to start over." James, thriving in his engineering program, had started talking about eventually starting his own firm instead of working for a corporation. "Why would I spend my life making other people rich," he said, "when I could build something myself?" Margaret's children had watched her transform from a defeated, scared woman into someone confident and purposeful. They'd seen her fail and try again. They'd seen her work impossible hours and figure out impossible problems. They'd seen her choose courage over comfort, growth over safety. She taught them the most important lesson, that life was long, that you got multiple chances, that 43, or 53, or 63, wasn't too late for anything. 2 years after she'd been laid off, Margaret got an email from her old company, Hawthorne and Associates. They were hosting a diversity and inclusion event about mature workers, and wanted to know if she'd be on a panel to discuss her experience transitioning out of corporate life. Margaret's first instinct was to delete it. Her second was to send a polite decline. Her third instinct, the one she followed, was to say yes and use the platform to tell the truth. She showed up to Hawthorne's gleaming corporate office wearing jeans and her bakery's t-shirt, not the business casual she'd worn for 17 years. She sat on a panel with other mature workers, who'd been gently pushed out of corporate life and had reinvented themselves. The audience was mostly women over 40, current Hawthorne employees, sitting in a conference room during their lunch break to hear about success stories of transition. Margaret looked at their faces and saw herself 2 years ago, worried, wondering if they were next, trying to figure out how to survive in a system that valued youth over experience. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't sugarcoat it. "Being laid off at 43 was devastating," she said. "I spent months applying for jobs and being rejected. I cried in my car. I watched my savings evaporate. I felt like my life was over." She paused, letting that sink in. But it wasn't over. It was actually just beginning. The corporate career I thought defined me was just one chapter. A long chapter, sure, but not the whole book. Being forced out of that chapter gave me permission to write a new one, and this chapter is better. She told them about the bakery, about the community she'd built, about the women she'd mentored. She told them about working harder than she'd ever worked but being happier than she'd ever been. She told them about owning her own value instead of waiting for someone else to assign it. "Here's what I learned," she said. "Companies will use you until you're inconvenient, then dispose of you. That's just business. Nothing personal. But you can choose something different. You can build something that values experience, that rewards loyalty, that recognizes that 43 isn't old, it's just hitting your stride." After the panel, dozens of women approached her. They asked for her card, her website, her advice. They told her they were scared. They told her they felt stuck. They told her they didn't know how to start. "Start anyway," Margaret told each of them. "Start scared. Start small. Just start." One woman, probably in her late 50s, hung back until everyone else had left. "I've been here 32 years, she said quietly. "I'm counting down to retirement. But I hate my job. I've hated it for a decade. I'm just too scared to leave." "What would you do if you weren't scared?" Margaret asked. The woman's eyes lit up. "I'd open a bookstore. A real one, with a coffee shop, where people could come and read and talk about books. I've been dreaming about it for years. So do it. I'm 57. Who starts a business at 57? Margaret smiled. Someone who wants to spend the next 20 years doing something they love instead of something they hate. Someone who spent 32 years learning exactly what not to do. Someone who's waited long enough. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You really think I could?" "I know you could. The question is, do you think you could?" On the second anniversary of her layoff, Margaret closed her bakery for the day and took herself to the beach. She sat on the sand, watching the waves, thinking about the past 2 years. All the fear and failure and hard work and small victories that had brought her here. She thought about the woman she'd been, competent but unfulfilled, successful but secretly miserable, climbing a corporate ladder she didn't even want to be on. She'd been so afraid of losing that job, of being cast out into uncertainty. Losing it had been the best thing that ever happened to her. Not because it was easy. Not because it was pleasant. But because it forced her to discover who she actually was when she wasn't performing someone else's version of success. She'd discovered she was brave, creative, resilient, capable of building something from nothing, capable of helping others do the same. She was 45 now. In society's eyes, she was supposed to be fading, becoming invisible, irrelevant, past her prime. Instead, she was just getting started. The business was growing. The community she'd built was thriving. Her kids were proud of her. She was proud of herself. She'd spent 20 years trying to fit into systems that didn't value her. Now she was building systems that did. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, the first woman she'd mentored. "Just signed my 3rd client. My consulting business is really happening. Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself." Margaret smiled. This was the real success, not just her own survival, but the ecosystem of women helping women, refusing to be diminished, claiming their second chances and turning them into greatest chapters. She thought about all the women who'd told her they were too old, too late, too scared. She thought about how she'd been one of them. She thought about how wrong they all were. Epilogue. 5 years later. Margaret stands in her new bakery, an actual storefront this time, with her name on the window, and watches the morning rush of customers. The space is beautiful, exposed brick, industrial shelving, a gleaming case full of pastries and cakes. Her team of 8 employees moves efficiently behind the counter, serving regulars who come for the bread and stay for the community. In the back room, she's teaching a baking class to 5 women, all over 40, all starting their own food businesses. This is her new favorite part of the work, passing on what she's learned, helping others avoid her mistakes, watching them discover their own strength. Emma works here part-time while finishing her business degree. She's already talking about starting her own company someday. James visits when he's home from graduate school, bringing his girlfriend to show off his mom's empire. Margaret is 48. She has a thriving business, a book deal for a memoir about career reinvention, a waiting list of ments, and a calendar full of speaking engagements. She's been featured in national publications, invited to testify before congressional committees about supporting mid-career workers, and recognized as one of her city's top entrepreneurs. But her favorite moment of the week is still Friday mornings at 6 a.m., when she has the bakery to herself for an hour before anyone else arrives. She puts on music, ties on her apron, and shapes loaves of sourdough bread, the same bread she learned to make during her divorce, during her darkest time, when she thought her life was ending. She'd been wrong. Her life wasn't ending. It was fermenting, transforming, becoming something better. The dough beneath her hands is warm and alive, full of potential. She shapes it carefully, knowing that with time and patience and the right conditions, it will rise into something beautiful. Just like her. Just like every woman who's been told she's too old, too late, too much or not enough. Just like every second chance that becomes the greatest chapter. She smiles, places the shaped loaves in their proofing baskets, and gets ready for another day of building the life she actually wants. The best years, she's learned, aren't behind her. They're right now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.